Hello, this is Paul Isaac speaking for the Autism Information channel. This is my 14th video, and in this video I'm going to do a redux of my first video, which was Life with Autism. In that video I explained that I had Asperger's syndrome, but that was made a year ago, and I would like to do a revamp or redux of that first video going through my life with autism. And I'll start from the beginning. So, the beginning is my birth. With my birth there were difficulties. There were difficulties. I was in distress for a start, and my mum had to have a caesarean section. I was a month premature. I had jaundice as a baby, and I was put into one of those plastic skaboos where you're sort of on sort of life support, I suppose. They're sort of sci-fi-ish, clear plastic, and you're just the little baby in the middle. From a personal perspective and opinion, I think those pre and after birth environmental factors did have an effect on my brain development, hence why I'm autistic. That's just a personal fear of mine, and also genetic factors and other family members being diagnosed with autism as well. The next stage was my mum noticing oddities in development. I had late speech, and my transition from crawling to toddling was much slower, and also she noticed that when I did crawl, I'm actually left-handed, but I was using my right arm like this, and I sort of, if you can imagine me being flat on the floor and just perching my elbow and arm and dragging myself along with my feet splayed out behind me, almost like a wounded soldier, sort of going across the sitting room carpet like that. So that was the first indication. The second indication was speech delay. The first word, although from my perspective it was a sound, was nan. So I used to say nan 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 a lot. That was my first word, although it didn't have any meaning. Again, it was much like a sound. And these were the two early factors that there was something different and odd about me and my development. I wasn't developing like a typical baby. So from that I went to preschool, obviously, a little play school that was set on the campus of the primary school, and there all I used to do was run around the hut, just round and round and round, and the only time I sat down was actually for a puzzle, and that was it. So that was my interaction for the day. It was a puzzle, which was, you know, not the most social thing to do, but nevertheless I enjoyed it. I had two obsessions at that point: the puzzle piece making, and toilets. Everywhere we went, whether we went to a shopping centre or we went out to a town or city or around my mum's friend's house, the first thing I had to see was the Lulu, which I called it, and I was amazed by the water, as if the toilet was magically creating this water, and I used to stare in amazement at this water flushing down the pan, and this went on for about I'd say about 2 years. So that was one of my first intense obsessions. Also during my primary school years and also preschool years, I had that's when derealisation set in. I've done another video about derealisation, explaining it in more depth. It's basically dissociating from not yourself, that's depersonalisation, but from objects and people, and getting frequent bouts of deja vu, which still continues to happen in intense circumstances. But that's when that dissociative trait started for me, around the preschool, primary school stage. Excuse me. So the next stage was obviously primary school. I used to it's very interesting in primary school, particularly those early years, rising fives onwards. There were just problems with, well, it was criticism that my parents got. Why isn't Paul doing this? Why isn't Paul socialising? Why does Paul walk around the playground on my own? The truth is that I like being on my own. I've come to realise that I didn't seek out any interaction, and if I did, it was mostly on my terms, and well, it was on my terms, and it was fragmented speech also. It was a lot of delayed echolalia, and also my speech didn't develop very well at primary school until I was 7 or 8 years old, so that's around the year 4, year 5 mark. So the speech delay initially, when I was younger, it carried on with not a very clear, concise development as someone with Asperger's has. It went beyond that, that 3 to 4 sort of age when initial delay, or even before that, an initial delay is recognised. It went on until 7 and 8. Then my speech was what one would call more typical. So there's a lot of criticism there from my parents' perspective, and I got a lot of criticism personally as a child, which has had obviously some effect on me as an adult, because you know, constantly getting criticised is not very good, specifically if there's no answers. They've got a load of questions, but they didn't give any answers for my behaviour. So that was the primary school years. They're very interested in. Bullying was sadly common. 2 teachers decided to do that. Once in year 4, because I used to walk around the playground on my own. I used to be quite hunched. I had an unusual gait, motor coordination, almost pigeon-toed, and she decided to stop all the class and tell me to walk in a line with all eyes on me, and then clap very patronisingly after I'd done this line of walking. If that was going to improve my social skills and gait, I don't know really what she was thinking. The last year of school I got bullied by a teacher. Sadly I had to go to mental health services, CAMS, that's Children's Mental Health Services. Nothing was resolved. It was just a hut where I used to go to every Thursday, where I was taught social skills, but there was no feedback from any psychiatrist, speech therapist, nothing. It wasn't the best by far. It confused my mum in particular, who used to take me there, and me as well. There was no understanding why I was there, although now I know. Looking back, a lot of people in that group were definitely on the spectrum. So the transition from primary school to secondary school, derealisation was still very prevalent. I dissociated very quickly. It was a big campus. Also visual agnosia came in as well. Although visual agnosia had been happening since goodness knows when in my personal development, it was very much prevalent here. It was just a bombardment of sights, sounds and colours. No wonder I was scared, which still affects me to this day, although I've learned to deal with it much better. I also had chronic exposure anxiety and internal anxiety from being just completely confused and from a sensory perspective, completely bewildered. Alexithymia also kicked in as well, because when I used to cry, I couldn't actually verbalise it in an emotion, but in a physical pain. So I'd say I've got a headache or a tummy ache, and that would be my way of explaining that I'm not very happy. Also, obsessive compulsive disorder was prevalent as well, because of the distress of structure being completely changed. I resorted to OCD, magical thinking. Washing my hands 10 times was, in my mind, going to make my world better, and that's when this all started. And I can remember being in after a PE lesson with these plumes of hot steam, and I was just trying to get to the 10th number, and the student saying, "What are you doing, Paul?" I said, washing my hands. I had to wash my hands 10 times. I also had another thing with my nan. I used to go at my nan's for breakfast during this secondary school period, and I used to go through a list of all the ailments, chronic illnesses that I wouldn't get, and she'd have to say no for every single one of them. Some of these things still exist: plug checking, light checking, checking taps are on, touching them. So this OCD is still very prevalent, and I actually got a dual diagnosis with my diagnosis of HFA. I also got a diagnosis of OCD, which I'm very pleased with. So that was the secondary school years. Towards the end of the secondary school years, you know, at this point, you know, I wasn't very happy. Obviously, the early years had their effect on me. I was very tired, really. I was tired of education, if I could be quite honest. I wasn't getting the right support. Lots of meetings were made with me, my parents and teachers, but nothing seemed to be resolved. There were lots of questions, none of them being answered. So my grades fell rapidly because of this bout of depression, and about 16 years old I was realising I was different to my peers from a social perspective. Not so much the sensory, I was taking a lot of that for granted, that other people had this fragmented sensory perception. Of course, through a lot of research now, I realise that that isn't true. There's actually people that do not have these sensory perceptions that I do.